The body of a woman, later identified as Wyvil, found lying on the side of the road, shot with a .45 caliber, her legs run over. A witness telling police back then they heard a gunshot, spotting a car similar to a blue Chrysler New Yorker with a white top, speeding away from where she was discovered.
A mother drops her son at the bus stop. A routine September morning in Michigan, 1989. A quick goodbye, a casual see you later. The kind of moment that happens countless times in countless places every single day. 13-year-old Dale Swanson watches his mom's car pull away, completely unaware that this ordinary goodbye would be their last. Within an hour, Beverly Wyvil would be dead. Her body, discarded on the side of a quiet road in Superior Township. Shot execution style, run over, left to die alone. For 35 years, her killer lived free, raised children, became a grandfather, built a life while Beverly's son grew up without a mother. For 35 years, this brutal murder remained unsolved, until a single discarded straw brought everything crashing down.
That day has been in my head since that day, as vivid as if it were yesterday.
September 18th, 1989. The morning started like any other in Canton Township, Michigan. The air was crisp with early autumn, leaves just beginning to turn golden at their edges, and Beverly Wyvil's day began with her usual routine. Driving Dale to the bus stop, she was wearing a light jacket against the morning chill, her hair newly styled, ready for whatever the day might bring. It was 8:40 a.m. when she said goodbye to her son, a moment that would later haunt him with its ordinary nature. A casual, see you later, the slam of a car door, the sound of her engine fading as she drove away. Everyday sounds that would echo in Dale's memory for decades to come. What happened in the next hour would remain a mystery for decades. Every minute between her departure and her death, a blank space that investigators would struggle to fill. At precisely 9:40 a.m., the quiet morning air in Superior Township was shattered by a single gunshot. The sound cut through the peaceful landscape like a knife, sharp, decisive, final. A witness, whose testimony would later prove crucial, heard the crack echo across their property. When they looked toward the sound, alert and alarmed by its unexpected intrusion into the morning quiet, they caught a fleeting glimpse of a vehicle speeding away from the scene. A blue Chrysler New Yorker with a distinctive white top, kicking up dust as it disappeared down the road like a ghost. The witness would later describe the car's departure as urgent, deliberate, like someone trying to disappear fast without drawing attention. Washtenaw County deputies responded to the call, their sirens breaking the uneasy silence that had settled after the gunshot. They arrived at the intersection of Ford and Gottfredson roads, an unremarkable crossing of rural routes that would forever be marked by tragedy. What they found was a scene that would haunt them for years, the kind of crime scene that experienced officers would later describe as among the most disturbing of their careers. Beverly's body lay on the side of the road, positioned in a way that suggested she had been forced to kneel before being executed with clinical precision, a single shot from a .45 caliber pistol. The morning dew still clung to the grass around her, and tire tracks in the soft earth told their own story of horror. But there was something else, something that spoke to a level of brutality beyond mere murder. The killer had run over her legs with their vehicle, a final act of degradation that suggested this wasn't just about ending a life. It was about destroying it, about sending a message that chilled investigators to their core. The horror of the crime scene was just the beginning. As darkness fell that night, investigators made another disturbing discovery that added a new layer to the nightmare. Nearly 10 miles away, at Griffin Park in Canton, they found Beverly's car, a location that would become the second piece in this tragic puzzle. The scene painted a chilling picture of her final moments, the engine still running, its quiet hum a ghostly reminder of interrupted life. The driver's door was wide open, as if frozen in that moment of departure. Her purse sat untouched on the seat, containing her wallet, money, credit cards, everything intact. A half-empty coffee cup still sat in the holder, the liquid long cold. It was as if she had simply stepped out of her car, perhaps forced out at gunpoint, never to return. The scene suggested no struggle, no fight, just a sudden terrible moment when everything changed. The evidence told a story that made investigators' blood run cold. This wasn't a robbery gone wrong. Her belongings were undisturbed, her jewelry still in place, her purse containing all her valuables. This wasn't a crime of passion. The execution-style killing suggested planning, precision, a calculated act rather than an emotional outburst. This was something worse. A predator who had stalked, abducted, and murdered a young mother in broad daylight, leaving behind a crime scene that seemed designed to send a message. The geographical distance between the two scenes, from Griffin Park to Ford and Gottfredson Roads, spoke of careful planning, of a killer who knew exactly what they were doing. Beverly Wyville's last hour on Earth had been one of unimaginable terror. From the moment she was forced from her car to her final moments on that quiet road, she had been in the hands of someone capable of calculated violence. The coffee cup, the running engine, the open door, each detail painted a picture of a life suddenly and violently interrupted. And somewhere out there, her killer was watching, waiting, perhaps already planning their next move. As news of Beverly's murder spread through Washtenaw County, detectives found themselves facing a case that defied easy answers. Their first steps followed standard procedure. Look at those closest to the victim. In cases of violence against women, the perpetrator is often someone they know, someone who had a motive. The most obvious suspect was Beverly's estranged husband. The timing seemed suspicious. A woman murdered in the middle of a divorce? Detectives spent days investigating his whereabouts, interviewing associates, checking and double-checking his alibi. But each line of inquiry led nowhere. He had been miles away when the murder occurred, with multiple witnesses to confirm his location. Then there was Beverly's new boyfriend.
There was stuff going on, though. She was divorcing my stepdad at the time, and my grandma wouldn't let her bring her new boyfriend in the house, so she would stay out in the car with her, but she wasn't living in her car.
Could there have been hidden tensions in their relationship? Unknown jealousies? Or dark secrets? But, like her ex-husband, his alibi was solid. He passed every test the investigators threw at him. The witness report of the blue Chrysler New Yorker with the white top became their most tangible lead. Detectives canvassed the area, checking every matching vehicle they could find. They interviewed car dealers, scoured registration records, followed up on dozens of tips from the public. But in 1989, without modern surveillance systems or automated license plate readers, finding one specific car was like searching for a needle in a haystack. The investigation took a darker turn when the autopsy results came back. Beverly hadn't just been murdered, she'd been sexually assaulted. The rape kit provided DNA evidence, what should have been their smoking gun. But this was 1989. DNA testing was in its infancy. There were no national databases to compare against, no way to match an unknown sample to a suspect unless they already had that person's DNA on file. The evidence was there, tantalizingly close, but the science to use it didn't exist yet. Weeks turned into months. Every new lead went cold. Every potential suspect was cleared. Beverly's murder began to look like the worst kind of case, one where the killer was a stranger, a predator who had chosen his victim at random. Those were the hardest cases to solve, especially in an era before advanced forensics and digital surveillance. The investigation hadn't hit a wall, it had hit a void. And in that void, Beverly's killer remained free, while her family waited for answers that seemed like they would never come. As the months turned into years, Beverly Wyville's murder became more than just an unsolved case. It became a wound that wouldn't heal, a shadow that hung over Washtenaw County. For the community, it was a reminder that a killer walked among them. For law enforcement, it was the case that kept them awake at night. But for Dale Swanson, it was a daily reality that shaped his entire life. Dale grew up carrying the weight of that September morning, every milestone, graduations, birthdays, achievements, was marked not just by celebration, but by his mother's absence. The teenage boy who had last seen his mom at a bus stop grew into a man, all while carrying questions that had no answers. Who had taken her? Why? Would he ever know the truth? There hasn't been a day since that I haven't thought about her, Dale would later tell reporters. That day is as vivid in my head as if it were yesterday. While other kids his age were dealing with normal teenage struggles, Dale was grappling with a loss that defied understanding. His mother hadn't just died. She had been taken, violated, murdered, and her killer was still out there, living free. The case file gathered dust in the Washtenaw County Sheriff's Office, joining thousands of other cold cases. Occasionally, new detectives would pull it out, review the evidence, hope that fresh eyes might see something others had missed. But the blue Chrysler New Yorker remained unidentified. The DNA sample sat in storage, waiting for a technology to catch up. The witnesses' memories faded with time. Some cold cases grow truly cold, forgotten by all except the families left behind. But Beverly's murder refused to fade away completely. Something about it, perhaps the brutality, perhaps the randomness, perhaps the image of a mother taken just after dropping her son at school, kept it alive in the community's memory. And somewhere in Michigan, her killer was living a normal life, perhaps thinking they had gotten away with murder. They hadn't counted on two things: advancing science and investigators who never truly give up. In 2022, something changed in the Washtenaw County Sheriff's Office. A new generation of detectives, armed with technologies that would have seemed like science fiction in 1989, decided to take another look at Beverly Wyvil's case. Cold cases were being solved across the country thanks to advancing DNA technology. Why not this one? The DNA sample from Beverly's rape kit had been preserved for 33 years, carefully stored away in an evidence locker. Back in 1989, it had been nothing more than a dead end. But now it represented something else. Hope. Hope that modern science could finally put a name to the killer who had walked free for so long. Detectives sent the sample to Othram Inc., a specialized forensic laboratory in Texas. This wasn't just any lab. This was a facility dedicated to solving the unsolvable, using cutting-edge DNA technology to crack cases that had gone cold decades ago. Their technique wasn't just about finding an exact match. It was about building family trees, tracing genetic connections through distant relatives until they found their target. The process was painstaking. Scientists extracted usable DNA from the decades-old sample. They created a genetic profile. They began searching through vast databases of voluntary DNA submissions, people who had used ancestry websites, never knowing their DNA might one day help catch a killer. Then, after months of work, a hit, a partial match. Someone related to Beverly's killer had submitted their DNA to a genealogy database. It wasn't the murderer himself, but it was enough to start building a family tree. Working backward, eliminating possibilities, following the branches until they found what they were looking for. A man who would have been in the area in 1989, who fit the profile they were looking for. Buster Robbins, 69 years old, living in Almont, Michigan. But they couldn't make an arrest based on a family tree alone. They needed confirmation. Modern DNA testing was incredibly precise, but they needed a fresh sample to compare against the evidence from 1989. So they watched. They waited. They followed Robbins, looking for their chance. On September 24th, 2024, that chance came. Robbins, completely unaware he was under surveillance, disposed of a plastic straw he had used. To him, it was trash. To the detectives watching, it was the key they had been waiting for. They retrieved the straw and rushed it to the lab. The comparison was made. The results came back. It was a match, not a partial match, not a maybe, but a definitive 1 in a quadrillion match. The DNA on Beverly Wyvil's body in 1989 was the same DNA on Buster Robbins' discarded straw in 2024. After 35 years, Science had given Beverly's case what it needed most: a name, an identity, a target. The killer who had lived free for 3.5 decades was about to face justice, and he never saw it coming.
It's not every day that you actually get leads on cold cases from 1989, especially involving a homicide. Our detective team then went to Lapeer County and was able to make an arrest in the situation.
The morning of September 24th, 2024, dawned like any other for Buster Robbins. He had no idea that police vehicles were quietly assembling near his Almont home, or that the life he'd built over 35 years was about to crumble. To him, it was just another day of retirement, another morning of freedom he'd stolen from Beverly Wyville. When Washtenaw County Sheriff's deputies and Michigan State police officers approached his door, Robbins answered without hesitation. Why wouldn't he? For 3.5 decades, he'd lived without consequence, without suspicion, without anyone knowing what he'd done that September morning in 1989. The moment of his arrest was anticlimactic. A quiet surrender from a man who likely knew the game was up. But it was what investigators found next that made the case against him ironclad. A search warrant executed on his home revealed a damning piece of evidence: a .45 caliber magazine with ammunition, the exact same caliber used to execute Beverly Wyville. But perhaps the most chilling confirmation came from Robbins' own wife. When questioned, she revealed something that sent chills down investigators' spines. In 1989, her husband had owned a blue Chrysler New Yorker with a white top, the exact vehicle witnessed fleeing the murder scene. The pieces had finally fallen into place, revealing a picture that was both clear and disturbing. For 35 years, Robbins had lived a seemingly normal life. He'd worked at an auto plant for over 4 decades. He'd raised children. He'd become a grandfather, even a great-grandfather. To his family, his neighbors, his coworkers, he was just another retiree enjoying his golden years. But beneath that ordinary facade lay a dark truth. This was a man who had abducted a young mother, sexually assaulted her, shot her execution style, and then run over her body, all before returning to his daily life as if nothing had happened. In the interrogation room, Robbins remained silent. He offered no confession, no explanation, no remorse. But he didn't need to speak. The DNA evidence was irrefutable. The pieces of evidence, the gun magazine, the car, the timeline, all pointed to one inescapable conclusion. Buster Robbins was charged with felony murder. After 35 years of freedom, he would spend whatever remained of his life behind bars, finally paying for the life he had stolen from Beverly Wyville and her son. The arrest brought a storm of emotions for Dale Swanson. When detectives called to tell him they'd finally caught his mother's killer, he found himself struggling to process the news. "I thought I'd be happy," he told reporters, his voice heavy with decades of grief. "I thought this would bring me peace, but it just brings back everything I tried to move past." The revelation of Robin's identity had made the pain even sharper.
I just want her to meet my kids, and that I've done the best I could, and I hope she was proud.
While Dale had grown up without a mother, unable to share his life's moments with her, Robbins had lived freely, enjoying all the family milestones he'd stolen from Beverly. He'd watched his children grow up, held his grandchildren, even lived to see his great-grandchildren, all while Beverly lay in her grave, robbed of those same precious moments with her own son.
That hurt the most. Thinking that 35 years ago he did this and then carried on with his life like nothing had happened.
In the courtroom, Robbins showed no emotion as the charges were read. His attorney argued for leniency based on his clean record, his family ties, his decades of employment, as if 35 years of avoiding justice somehow made him less guilty. But the DNA evidence spoke louder than any defense. The science that hadn't existed in 1989 had finally given Beverly Wyville a voice. For the detectives who had worked the case, both in 1989 and now, this was more than just another solved cold case. It was proof that time doesn't erase evidence, that killers can't outrun their DNA, and that justice while sometimes delayed, is never truly denied. Some say time heals all wounds, but for families of murder victims, time often just deepens the questions. For 35 years, Beverly Weevil's case reminded us how a single act of violence creates ripples that affect generations. A son growing up without his mother, a family left wondering, a community changed forever by the knowledge that a killer walked among them. But her case also shows us something else, that no matter how many years pass, justice has a way of catching up. The same DNA that seemed useless in 1989 became the key that finally locked Buster Robbins away. The science that didn't exist when Beverly was murdered became the voice she could no longer use to name her killer. Today, thousands of cold cases sit in evidence rooms across America, waiting for technology to advance, waiting for that one breakthrough that could bring answers to families still living with questions. How many other killers are out there thinking they've escaped justice? How many families are still waiting for their own breakthrough? What cold case haunts your town? Share your thoughts below, because sometimes keeping these stories alive is the first step towards solving them. And remember, no matter how cold a case might seem, as long as we remember, there's always hope for justice.